Mandela's legacy, the end of apartheid, when Nelson Mandela published his autobiography in 1994. He titled it Long Walk to Freedom, and indeed, the walk was long. 27 years in prison, 18 of them spent on Robben Island, sentenced to hard labor in a lime quarry that permanently damaged his eyesight. But his journey toward freedom was not his alone. It was the collective struggle of millions of South Africans who endured over for decades, under one of the most brutal systems of racial segregation since Nazi Germany, apartheid. Freedom became the rallying cry that united a diverse range of resistance groups. In 1955, the Congress Alliance was formed, a coalition led by the African National Congress ANC alongside the South African Communist Party, the Congress of Democrats, the Colored People's Congress, the South African Indian Congress Trade Unions, and the Federation of South African Women. Though their political ideologies differed, some drew inspiration from socialism, others from traditional African governance. All agreed on one central goal: the complete dismantling of apartheid. That same year, they drafted the Freedom Charter with Mandela's direct involvement. It demanded a democratic government, equality for all races, redistribution of land, the end of forced labor farms, housing for all, decent jobs, public services, and equal education. This charter laid the foundation for a unified resistance, not liberal, not communist, but rooted in justice and dignity. It also solidified Mandela's leadership in the ANC and proved that freedom was a vision worth fighting for. But apartheid was not going to end quietly. This massacre shattered any hope that civil disobedience would be enough. Mandela and the ANC realized they needed a different strategy. That same year, they formed Umkhonto we Sizwe, or Spear of the Nation, a militant wing committed to sabotage. Their aim was not to harm people, but to weaken the apartheid system through strategic attacks on infrastructure. Mandela sought support across Africa and Europe. He met with leaders of newly independent African nations and traveled to England to gather international allies. His goal was to make apartheid a global issue, and it worked. Still, Mandela was arrested in 1962 and sentenced to life in prison in 1964. But the world didn't forget him. The Sharperville massacre and Mandela's imprisonment sparked international outrage. Though many Western countries had once supported South Africa for its economic value, they began to distance themselves as apartheid's crimes became undeniable. By the 1960s, sanctions, embargoes, and cultural boycotts began isolating South Africa. The country left the Commonwealth in 1961 and was barred from the Olympics and global competitions because of its insistence on racial segregation. Even Brazil played a role in 1959. A Brazilian soccer team refused to play in South Africa after authorities tried to ban black players. It was a small act, but a powerful one. Inside the country, resistance intensified, but armed struggle proved just as limited as peaceful protest. It wasn't until the Soweto uprising in 1976 that the regime was truly shaken. Thousands of black students protested being forced to learn in Afrikaans, a language they associated with oppression. The regime responded with bullets. Over 600 were killed. The uprising marked a turning point. A new generation had risen. Their leader was not Mandela, who was still in prison, but Stephen Biko, founder of the Black Consciousness Movement. Biko argued that the first step to liberation was psychological, that black people needed to reclaim their dignity and reject internalized oppression. His slogan, "Black is beautiful." The government responded with brutal repression. International pressure grew. Artists, athletes, and politicians around the world joined the call to end apartheid. In 1988, on Mandela's 70th birthday, over 600 million people tuned into a global concert demanding his release. songs like Free, Nelson Mandela, and Mandela Day became anthems of resistance. But apartheid wasn't just a political embarrassment, it became economically unsustainable. Major companies pulled out, governments imposed sanctions, public opinion turned. Even long-time allies of Youth Africa began to abandon the regime. Desperate, the government offered Mandela his freedom on one condition, that he denounce all violence. Mandela refused. He famously said, "Only free men can negotiate." He would not bargain from a prison cell. Finally, in 1990, Mandela was released without conditions. He emerged not as a man seeking revenge, but as a visionary leader committed to peace. He led negotiations for a multiracial democracy and resisted calls for violent retribution, even as his people were still being killed. In 1993, he and President F.W. de Klerk shared the Nobel Peace Prize. 1 year later, in 1994, South Africa held its first free elections. The ANC won by a landslide, and Nelson Mandela became the first black president of the country that had once labeled him a terrorist. But the Mandela who took office was not the firebrand of the 1960s. He had evolved into a unifier, a man who believed that healing a nation required more than punishment. It required truth. It required forgiveness. Under his leadership, South Africa established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, allowing victims and perpetrators to speak, to confess, and to begin rebuilding trust. Mandela served just one term, stepping down in 1999, but his legacy extended far beyond his presidency. He became a global symbol of dignity, justice, and moral leadership. He married Graca Machel, a respected Mozambican activist and former First Lady, and continued his humanitarian work until his retirement in 2004. Mandela passed away in 2013 at the age of 95. Over 100,000 people attended his memorial service, including 80 heads of state. The world mourned not just a man, but a movement, a reminder that peace, even after decades of pain, is possible. Mandela's story is not just about the fall of apartheid. It's about the rise of courage, the power of unity, and the conviction that even in a world built on injustice, change is possible. He showed us that real leadership is not born from hatred, but from hope. That forgiveness is not surrender, it's strategy. And that freedom is not given, it is earned, step by painful step. So, ask yourself, what chains are you willing to break? What truth are you willing to stand for? If Mandela's legacy inspired you, like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts and share it with someone who needs to remember what true leadership looks like. Because the long walk to freedom doesn't end with Mandela. It continues with us.